Hi, welcome back. So in the last video we finished with the control flow in JavaScript by finishing an exercise, and that was basically all you needed to know in the control flow for now. And the next thing we are going to start with is JavaScript arrays, right? So first of all, what are arrays? So arrays are basically lists, right? And by list I don't mean anything special, just the normal list you see in your everyday life, right? You could obviously need lists for various reasons. You could use them to represent marks of 200 students or average temperatures of last 10 days and all chapters of a book. And obviously this is just three examples. You could have millions and millions and billions of examples of how you could use a list. So that is not a really big thing as to why you would use lists. It's obvious that you could. Now one thing, we want to store the my represent here, I mean store, right? So we want to store marks of 200 students. So how you could do this without a list is you could make 200 different variables by the name of student 1, student 2, student 3, student 4, and so on till student 200, and store their marks in that variable. That would be fine. But do you think that would actually be very friendly for you? Like making 200 variables separately and then assigning them values separately, that would take 200 lines by itself. And then when you have to print all of them, you would have to use 200 other lines, because there is no way you can start from student 1 and move on to student 2 with a JavaScript built in something. However, you can iterate over an array, visit all the elements of an array using a loop, and that would literally take you 2 lines. So I mean, with an array, with the help of an array, you could store all these values in a single variable, right? You could create a variable, and that variable, instead of storing just one value, could store a complete list. And that is what an array is, right? So one resource that I really like for arrays is this W3 Schools whole webpage on JavaScript arrays. You can just search JavaScript arrays on Google, and you will get to this web page. It will be the first or the second link, because this is a really famous website, right? Yeah, so they have a lot of things here, and this, if you are ever stuck conceptually, like some theoretical concept that you're unsure of how an array works, then this can definitely help you, right? Now in this video we are going to discuss all the various things you could do with an array, and how you use an array, how you make an array, right? But if you ever need some conceptual clarity, definitely I recommend this site, right? Alright, so now let's move to our VS Code, and first of all I'll open my folder. Yeah, so I have my folder here, and I'll make a new folder in the course material for GitHub, and that is named let's call it arrays, right? And so inside this folder I'll create a new file by the name of arrays.html, and I will also make a new file by the name of arrays.js. So now I have my HTML and my JS file set up inside the arrays folder, right? And now first I can get my standard HTML boilerplate. And I indent this. Right. And I'll give an h1 by the name of JavaScript arrays, right? So that's the only use for the HTML file. And now let me just open this up once. All right. Yeah. So now I have this file, and I'll link my JavaScript with this. by the name of arrays.js. Right. And the only thing we'll need from this HTML file is basically printing things to the console so that we can get a better idea of, what is happening. And that's the only thing. We're not going to make anything interactive for now because this is just an intro to arrays. But you will use arrays a lot while developing different things, right? Right. So first of all, we know that array is a list. Hence, it is a variable that can store multiple data. Right. So this is fine. And so means that we'll have some variable named as, let's say, AR, and it will have a lot of values, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's say, or let's save the marks of 5 students, 78, 82, 86, sorry, and 92, 100, and then 60, right? So these are the marks of 5 students that we have, say, and we want to store these in an array, right? So how you make an array is you do something like this. So this has basically told JavaScript that this by the name of AR is an array, and these square brackets are always representation of an array, right? So what this line is doing basically is this is only telling JavaScript that a variable named AR is now an array, and we can use the various methods that we have inbuilt for an array on this particular variable, right? And just to show you, we do have a lot of methods here. We have dot sort, which is, of course, you don't know what that is, but this cars is a variable here, and dot sort is working only because cars is an array. If you would do something like x dot sort, that would not work, right? So now we are telling JavaScript that AR is an array, of course. So now we need to give it values, right? So how do we give it values? One way, when we already know here the values that we have to give it, so you can simply do something like this. And this is your array, completely initialized, and it has all those values, right? So now, if I print this to the console, I refresh my page, I inspect, I go to the console, I get an array 5, and it has these, all the values that we put in. So now these are some other things too, length and proto, and proto is quite advanced for this stage, so you can leave that. And length is basically the length of the array, so that JavaScript assigns by default. It will see what the length of your array is, and if at any point of time I decide to go in and add another set of marks, then, and if I refresh, I see my length becomes 6, right? So this is automatically done by JavaScript. We are not setting this length from, by writing some code specific. Everything is handled by JavaScript, and now we have this 78, 86, 92, 100, 60, 71 in an array, and this is the representation that we used, right? So now there are two questions that might come to your mind. First, how do we access any one of these elements if we want to, and we don't want to access the whole array, right? Well, that's a really valid question. And second, what do the 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 here mean? So actually both the questions can be answered only when I tell you what they mean, right? So what the 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are, they are indexes in the array, right? So if I put a comment, indexes in the array, right? So what is indexes? It is basically the number at which an element is in the array. So this is the first element, this is the second element, this is the third element, this is the fourth element, this is the fifth element, and this is the sixth element. So you would think that if we are assigning a number to all of them, the number for this, I'll put a comment here and I'll make this. Yeah. So number for this should be 1, number for this should be 2, number for this 3, similarly 4, and 5, and 6, right? And you're taking a really right approach, except in any programming language, the indexing starts from 0, right? So this is the 0th element, this is the first element, this is the second element, this is third, this is fourth, and this is fifth. So basically, that's why we start most of our loops from 0, that our indexing in an array always starts from 0, right? So the first element you would put will be the 0th element of an array. And that is why we have the 0 here. So basically this is index colon value, right? So yeah, and if I change this, let's say I replace this 78 with 86 and 86 with 78, and I go back and I refresh, I see my 86 is now the 0th index and 78 is now the first index. So this is indexing is basically the order in which the elements are stored in the array, and indexing is how you will access the elements in the array, right? You will not say something like, and you cannot say something like, I want the element which has the value 100. No, you can't. What you can tell is, I want the element which is at the third index of the array, right? And that is basically what indexing does for you. With the help of indexing, you can refer to elements in the array. So how do you actually do that? So now we have an array here, and if I print this, I see I have my array, and of course, as this is defined in my JavaScript file, it is accessible here. So now let's say I want to access the first element, that is the 0th element. So that I can do simply by ar square brackets 0, right? So ar1 will give me the next element, ar2 gives me the next element, ar3, and so on, and I can do ar. I have 6 elements, right? So ar5. This gives me the last element. So this is basically how you would access elements inside an array, right? And again, you cannot just simply say that I want the element which has a value of 92. That cannot happen. You will have to perform some, complex things on this to actually get the index on which the value 92 is present, if you ever need to, right? But we'll get to that later. For now, we can see that these are assigned numbers, they are assigned indexes, all the elements of the array, and those indexes can be used to print elements out of the array, right, and access them. So let's say I do something like array is equal to 10, then I do a plus is equal to ar5. So now a becomes 81 because ar5 was 71, right? So this is basically how you would access an element inside of an array, right? Yeah, alright. And now this is not just a way to read elements, you can also write elements by this. So if you do something like ar4 is equal to 20, and now if I print ar, I see my this element is 20. So ar4 is basically now a name for the fifth element of this array, because indexing starts from 0, so 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So the fifth element is represented by ar4, and you can do anything you want with this. You can assign this a new value, which we did here. You could read the value, of course, like we have been doing, or you could do something like ar4 plus is equal to ar5, and now if we print ar, this is now 91 because this was 71 plus 20, so this becomes 91, right? So this is basically all that you need to know about accessing elements in an array, right? And we'll see some small things now. So the first is the length thing, right? So basically what an array is an object, right? If you see what is here, arrays are objects, and we are going to cover objects a little later, like the next section. But what you can know about this is that they have some other properties inside of them too. Like if I printed array and I open this, I see I have my length here, right? And if I open this proto, don't worry what that is. I have a lot of things here, and this f in front of each of them, and then this name and this parentheses actually means that they are functions. So we have a lot of inbuilt functions when we actually make an array, right? So to access any of these, properties, which is length, or functions, which is proto, you cannot do arr length, right? Because that simply won't work. So you could do something like arr length, and that would work, but that can get really confusing for you now until you've not studied objects. So you can ignore this for now, and I'll print arr again. So how you access things inside is using the dot, right? So this is common to all of JavaScript, that if you have some variable inside which you have some length, like the length is inside the array, so you can do add dot and then you can write length. And if you take some random function from here, let's say I use add.pop, right? So I have this arr pop function inside of the proto, which is basically inside the arr. Again, you don't know what proto is, but you can simply consider that this pop function, which is somewhere right here, yeah, pop function is inside this array itself, right? Like the length. So if I do add.pop and now I print arr, I see my last element has been deleted, right? So yeah, so this is how you would access things inside of an array, right? And now some one or two basic things that you needed to know. What first, you can get the length of the array by arr.length, and you could do arr.length. So basically, if you wanted to access the last element at all times, and the array is not a fixed length, like if you are taking things from the user and entering into the array and taking from the array at in real time, which is dynamic, so you will not always have a fixed length for the array, right? So how would you handle that? So basically that is done to basically having the last element can be handled through arr.length. So we have arr.length here, but remember the indexing starts from 0, so the last element is always like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So in a length of 6, the last element has an index of 5. In a length of 5, the last element has an index of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that is always arr.length minus 1. And this is how you can access the last element. So this is the use of arr.length, right? And one last thing, that when you're taking things in real time from the user and entering them into the array, and your array is not of fixed size here, so basically you would not know what the last index is, right? Here we know that if we want to insert a new element, we can do arr5 is equal to say 95, and now arr has a new element which is 95, but you might not know what this number is always. So what you can do is you can use this inbuilt function named arr.push. So basically you are pushing values into the array, and inside this you can give a value, and when now I press arr, I see this value has been added to the array at the end, right? Yeah. So that was all that I wanted to show you right now for an array, which was basically, first, array is a list and it is a variable that can store multiple data items, right? So now if we see that if we had 200 marks, we could have 200 students in here, and that would always be represented by a variable named AR, right? So that becomes really helpful. and you could have all the marks inside one variable, and hence you would not have to keep track of 200 different variables. And as soon as you want the marks of any single student, you just simply access that index in the array and you get the marks. And the next thing, that this is how you make an array, and you can access it using indexes like ar index. Like index would be a value here, right? So index would be a value here, and that would give you the respective value from the array, right? This is how you access. And the next thing is that, yeah, that was all. And the ar index can be used to actually, again I'll write that, can be used to not just access the value but to change the value, or do anything with the value. So ar 0 is basically now a name for this position, and whatever is on this position can be referenced by ar 0 like a normal variable, and you could add that, you could change that, and anything you could do anything with that, right? And so yeah, the last thing is you can access things inside the array by the dot operator, right? So array dot length would give you the length of the array, and array dot push would allow you to push new things in the array. So that is basically all about an array that you need to know. And one more thing is that you can have an array of any data type, right? You could have A, B, C, E, F, G, H, I, J. And now if I go to my page and I refresh my page, I see I have a new array which has A, B, C, E, F, G, H, I, J. And now if I access array 0, I get A, B, C. So now I have a string array. You could also have a boolean array by having true, false, false, true, anything here. So it is not that array is only of integers. You could have an array of any data type. So in the next video we will see some ways to access these elements one by one inside an array, and that is actually one of the most useful aspects, that you would access these elements one by one and process them in some way that you need, right? Yeah, so that is it for this video. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.